Okay, hello everyone. Thanks so much for being here today with us. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're thrilled to have over almost 300 people registered for today's event. And today we're going to be looking at university partnerships between the University of Al Fashir in North Darfur, in Sudan, Tufts University in Boston, and the University of Zalingei in Central Darfur, Sudan. Our program today is divided into three parts. First, we'll talk about the what, why, how, and the successes and challenges of our inter-university partnership. We have representatives from the three different universities to talk with us about that. Next, we'll turn to research findings that come out of this partnership. One of our researchers will present information that challenges some of the prevailing narratives about livelihoods, social safety nets, and natural resource management in Darfur. And finally, we will have about 30 minutes of Q&A at the end. In case you're new to the Zoom platform, let me just take a moment to orient you. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see all the tools that you need. Please use the chat icon if you are having issues with the platform, and someone will try to help you. Please use the Q&A icon to the left of the chat icon to submit questions for the panelists or the moderator. You can submit your questions at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. Please don't put them in the chat. Use the Q&A icon specifically for questions about the presentation. Next, you're probably wondering who I am. I am Elizabeth Stites, and I am the chair of today's event. I am a professor and research director at the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University, which is in Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Musa Abdul Jalil, who will moderate our panel of colleagues from the University Partnership. Musa is a professor of social anthropology and the director of the Peace Research Institute at the University of Khartoum. His research focuses on areas of ethnicity, migration, customary land tenure, and traditional mechanisms for conflict management, with a special ethnographic focus on Darfur. Next, we have Musa Adam Ismail. He was the lead researcher for the University of Zalingei. He is an associate professor at the Faculty of Agriculture and also the director of the Institute for Peace and Development Studies and the acting director of the university. Musa specializes in agriculture and has been working in the fields of livelihoods, local conflict, and peace building for more than 20 years. Next, we have Abu Bakr Sayam, who led the team for the University of Al Fashir. Abu Bakr is an associate professor of forestry and natural environment and the principal at the university, where he has worked for 25 years in a variety of different roles. He has a PhD in forestry and natural environment from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece. Next, we have Helen Young, who was the principal investigator for the TADU project and led the research for Tufts. Helen directs the Feinstein Center's research program on nutrition, livelihoods, and conflict. And in that role, she has led several multi-year research projects in Sudan, Chad, and most recently in Kenya. These projects depend on wide-ranging partnerships and collaboration with civil society, government, and international actors. Last but not least, I'm pleased to have Hassan Alatar Sati Hassan with us. He is a visiting fellow at the Feinstein International Center and the research manager for the TADU-2 research project. He also is an independent researcher. His main research interests revolve around development and security studies. Before starting his research career, he worked with different NGOs managing, delivering, and developing interventions. Before we start, we're going to do a short poll of the audience. Anne, can you please put up the poll? So in this poll, you have the option to participate, and we hope that you do. And please vote for single choice in each of the 3 questions. You should all see the poll on your screen. Okay, Anne, do we have the poll results ready?
Looks like a few people are still participating, so I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. Oh, a few more seconds.
Great, no problem. We'll give everyone a little bit more time.
Okay, I'm going to end it now. It looks like people have stopped responding by and large.
Great. Okay, so just briefly to reflect on some of the answers we have. For the first question, whether or not, which is about if people agree with the statement that Northern universities bring most of the expertise in partnerships between Northern and Southern universities. The majority, the greatest number of responses, not the majority, excuse me, neither agree nor disagree. Well, actually it's disagree is the leading one, followed by neither agree nor disagree, and then some in the agreement category. Our second question, the increased scarcity of natural resources leads to conflict. We're relatively split between strongly agree and agree, with very few people saying disagree and no one saying they strongly disagree, and then a handful in the middle. Lastly, our third question, the most popular response was that to deal with conflict involving natural resources, priority should be given to building consensus among users about how to organize access. The next most popular is conflict resolution more broadly, and the least popular is technical interventions to increase availability. Okay, this is really useful and helpful, and thank you to everyone who participated. Next, I want to turn it over to Helen Young, who will briefly explain the Interagency Partnership and situate it within the context of the Tadood and Rising work. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Liz. And hello, everyone. Welcome. As background for our panel discussion and the presentation on research findings, I would like to give you an overview of the Tadood project and its sister project Rising, and briefly describe the operational research led by Tufts University and how we came to localize the research with 2 Darfur universities leading their own unique and personalized programs. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge and thank the project donor, the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, formerly UK DFID, who have funded Tadood from the beginning. Thank you also to USAID, who are now funding the sister project to Tadood known as Rising, which also includes a research component led by Elizabeth Stites. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Mohammed Adam, the Chief of Party for Tadood 2 at Catholic Relief Services, who has been a close colleague and mentor for the past 8 years, and Tadood 1 and 2 have flourished under his leadership. Next slide, please. So Tufts has been the research partner of the Tadood Resiliency Project since 2014. And Tadood is an INGO consortium led by Catholic Relief Services. Under the first Tadood project, it represented a significant shift in programming approaches, marking a transition from humanitarian assistance towards development and recovery processes. The research findings from Tadood 1 influenced the design of the Tadood 2 Integrated Natural Resource Management Programme. This earlier research found that the resilience of Darfuri livelihoods was closely linked with relationships around the use, access to, and management of natural resources. Hence, one of the aims of Tadood 2 is to achieve more sustainable and peaceful access to natural resources. Communities where Tadood is working include returnees and conflict-affected vulnerable populations in all 5 states of Darfur. As we know, conflict and insecurity is an ongoing concern in the Darfur context, and clearly many households in the targeted communities are still affected and recovering from the impact of events over the past 20 years and continuing, and still require some support. The Rising project complements Tadood with a focus on NRM, resilience, food security, and governance. Next slide, please. As the research partner, Tufts does what we call operational research. And by this, we mean research that is used to inform and influence the design and implementation of program interventions. The aim of the Tufts research as part of Tadood is to strengthen the impact of resilience-related actions and interventions in 2 ways: by contributing evidence and promoting contextual understanding of resilience in the Darfur context, and also by facilitating the use of evidence in developing and applying more effective approaches to increase the resilience of livelihoods in Darfur communities. And the evidence we provide, it's either based on the existing wider body of knowledge, which is synthesized through desk studies, or we may fill specific evidence gaps with follow-up inquiries or specific studies. We promote contextual understanding through our research uptake activities. And this is a very important aspect of our work. It includes a wide range of activities ranging from stakeholder meetings, disseminations, workshops, and activities through our in-country research advisory group, who are a group of Sudanese professionals, academics, and senior civil society leaders. On the right are our main activities in the bubbles. The ISI Income Stream Index is a carryover study from Tadood 1, Learning About Resilience, led by Mary Fitzpatrick. As I mentioned, we have added a focus on integrated natural resource management and produced a series of learning briefs related to livelihoods and NRM. Alongside the development of these 4 NRM briefs, Tufts have partnered with 2 Darfur universities, Al Fashir and Zalingei, supporting them to lead their own research, including stakeholder consultations, development of research questions, development of the methodology, implementation, writing up, and dissemination. In other words, the entirety of the research process. The Rising operational research is learning about the customary systems people have for supporting each other. So this slide just briefly summarizes some of the outputs under the Tufts research activities and outputs, starting with the desk studies, which I mentioned, the 4 learning briefs, and the study on informal safety nets. And you will find those on our website. I just want to pause for a moment and say something about the research uptake that's been an integral part of Tufts' program under Tadood since the beginning, focusing on outreach and engagement with the Tadood operational partners. But under phase 2, our uptake strategy has expanded to include an engagement with a wider range of stakeholders, with the support of the research advisory group, with currently 19 members, 7 of whom are women. From the start, we sought to promote a group that was inclusive as possible and consulted widely to ensure a broad representation by sector, government, non-government, etc., and ensuring representation of experts with direct lived experience in Darfur. Subsequent appointments had been based on members' nominations and voting. This group has played a critically important role in supporting, advising, and facilitating the Tadood operational research. Oh, and as part of advising, critiquing, which has been really important. Next slide, please. By the end of Tadood 1, the value of the operational research was cleared to Tadood partners, and so a new operational research component was proposed for the second phase. However, there was a big difference. The Tadood partners all agreed on the importance of working with Sudan universities, and particularly the Darfur universities. Now, while Tufts had some prior experience of working with Afad University for Women in Khartoum, we had not worked with Darfur universities as institutions. And the reason for that, in part, is because under the former sanctions regime, it was not possible for a US university to partner directly with the Sudanese government institution, which the universities are. Hence, this relationship has heralded a new approach, including new ways of working for all sides. Next, please. So some key partnership study milestones. We started the process in 2018, and it was kicked off with an invitation from the Dean of the University of Zalingei to Tufts, which we were very pleased to accept, and we learned a lot during that visit. This was followed by a workshop to explore ideas and begin to develop the principles underpinning the partnership. By June the following year, we had budgets and scope of work finalized. And the work, forgive me.
أنا في اجتماع بالزوم أرجع لكم بعد ما انتهي.
Anyway, the work was interrupted by COVID, which delayed going forward. But the universities were very flexible and they quickly changed track, and they completed 2 rapid assessments of COVID measures on the ground in the 2 states. After 10 months delay, the fieldwork began again, followed by a series of workshops to analyze the data and draft reports. These were led by the universities with support from some Tufts colleagues, including in particular Severio Cratley. By December of last year, research reports were finalized and dissemination events planned for Darfur. So we have shifted from working with fellow researchers as team members on our Tufts projects to a partnership supporting our Darfuri partners to undertake their own studies. Next slide, please. So the Universities of Al Fashir and Zalingei have both completed a substantive body of work, and 2 study reports are available on our website, supported by desk studies. First up, we have the role of community-based NRM mechanisms in sustainable livelihoods in North Darfur by the University of Al Fashir. Next, we have the role of the native administration in NRM and conflict resolution in Central Darfur by the University of Zalingei. They have also shared their findings with diverse audiences in their states and also in South Darfur, with the participation and support of a research advisory group member, Yusuf El Toib, and our Tufts colleague, Hassan Alatar. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the importance of localizing the entirety of the research process. This means local universities are leading their own research, from setting the agenda with local stakeholders to finalizing the work. At the same time, as part of this process, we tailored capacity building and project management support according to their needs. Thus, throughout, there was a close working relationship between all 3 universities, and I hope this will continue long after Tadood has finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that fascinating overview and introduction. Now we're going to move to our panel discussion. Our moderator is having a bit of problems with his connectivity from Khartoum. I see him on now. Musa Abdul Jalil, I'm going to turn it over to you to start the discussion. But if your connectivity issues continue, just let me know and I can jump in and play the moderator role. Okay, Musa, over to you. I think Musa is still having problems, which is fine. He's working with IT, so I'm going to step in and at least kick us off. So to start off for our panel discussion, there's 4 things that we'd like to hear about from each of our panelists. Helen just gave us the broad contextual overview. So now I'd like each of the universities to tell us about each of the representatives of the universities to tell us a little bit about their university in 3 minutes or less. And we'll start with Abu Bakr Siam from the University of Al Fashir. Abu Bakr, give us some context about your university.
Thank you, Parvez. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. University of Al Fashir was established in 1990. It's located in Western Sudan, specifically in North Darfur state, which is characterized by a dry environment, the typical climate of Sahel of Africa. University comprises about 21 faculties, including faculty of environmental science and natural resources, at which me and research team belong. Also, it comprises or composed of about 17 specialized research centers, such as Peace and Development Centers, Water Research Center, and Sahel and Sahara Research Center. In addition to this, also it involves some central deanship, such as Deanship of Scientific Research and Innovation, which hosted the research activities of Inter-University Partnership and of Ta'adud project. As more than the livelihood of more than 80% of Darfur people based on natural resource, including agriculture, pastoralism and agro-pastoralism, which combine both agriculture, farming and grazing. The priorities of research focus on livelihood systems, natural resource management, peace and conflict-related issues. It is well known that the rural communities in Darfur have been managing the natural resource for centuries, but some problems or some interrelated factors have disturbed the system, such as a stressful environment and changing governance patterns and rules around land access, land tenure, and conflict resulted from competition of natural resources between different resource users. So many informal and formal actors initiated community-based natural resource management committees in different or various communities as initiative aiming to ensure a natural resource of sustainable use of natural resources and equity distribution. So it is necessary to understand the context in which these committees were created and the way they function and their interrelationship with other institutions in order to develop informed policies and approaches to integrated natural management in North Darfur. So the title of our study in this partnership came under the title of, as we've seen, the role of community-based natural resource management in sustainable livelihood in North Darfur. The workforce of the university, the total number of employees, about 1,200, 400 of them are teaching staff. The number of students, about 20,000, 1,000 of them postgraduate students. The University of Al Fashir has many collaborations with various private and official institutions and also UN agencies. The partnership between University of Al Fashir and Tufts University is first collaboration between American academic institutions. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Abu Bakr. Now let's hear from Musa at the University of Zalingei.
Thank you, Anne. I'm Musa Ismail from University of Zalingei. I'm going to talk about our university, University of Zalingei. The University of Zalingei is one of the Sudanese public universities with a national vision, mission, goals, and state of origin and spread. And it is based in the city of Zalingei, the capital of Central Darfur State. It was established in 1994 and had that time had some faculties in the city of Genena, when Zalingei and Genena are in one state that called West Darfur State. But after the separation of Central Darfur State from Genena and the establishment of Genena University, the faculties that were in Genena were left to Genena University. There are three faculties left to Genena University. The university now has 12 faculties and 4 specialized centers and institutes. The total number of our students in all these faculties is about 10,000. And total number of employees in the university is about 600. Among them, 200 of them are teaching staff, 14 are technicians, 360 employees. One of the goals of our university is to spread awareness in the state community and interact with its problems and find solutions to them. This is done through its different faculties and centers and institutes. Since its establishment, University of Zalingei has cooperated with some national and international organizations, as well as with some universities inside and outside Sudan. In the field of scientific research and our experience with Tufts University, we consider it is one of the successful examples of cooperation with our university or with university outside Sudan. Through cooperation with Tufts University, a scientific study was carried out in the previous years, 2021, on the role of native administration in conflict resolution and integrated natural resources management. The study was also carried out in cooperation with some international organizations. They are mainly CRS and NCA. They are international NGOs working in the state, and they are going to benefit from the results of our study. As for West Sudan, cooperation has taken place with University of Khartoum through the Peace Institute in the field of peace building in Darfur. Our university has also cooperated with some United Nations organizations like UNDP and WFP in the field of development and peace building in the state, Central Darfur state. These are our experience with cooperation with NGOs, UN agencies, and also other universities inside the Sudan and outside the Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Musa. Now we'll turn to Helen to tell us a little bit about Tufts University.
Thank you, Liz. So the Feinstein International Center has a long connection and history of working in Sudan, which dates back to the 80s and the work on the eradication of rinderpest. So Tufts have collaborated in multiple ways with Sudanese actors over the past 20 years. Our first inter-university memorandum of understanding was in 2001 with University for Women for research, a collaborative project for research on migration. In 2004, we depended on our links with Sudanese networks, professionals and practitioners working for NGOs, the UN and government to conduct multiple independent studies from 2004 to about 2010. So at this time, we were not working in partnership with the international community, but we were working closely with Sudanese networks. 2010 marked a shift from working in this independent way to working in partnership with national NGOs, SOS Sahel, Dara, Al-Masar, under the umbrella of UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme, and the Sudan Integrated Environment Programme. From 2014, as I mentioned just now, we became the operational research partner of Tadood, and then later worked with Concerned Worldwide under the BRACED programme. The individual projects are part of an extended engagement and relationship between Tufts University and Sudan. So I really want to emphasize the continuity of our work over the past 2 decades and the importance of this, as we believe it makes the whole bigger than the sum of the parts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Good news in that Musa Abdul Jalil has fixed his connectivity issues for the time being. So I'm going to turn the moderator role back over to him. Musa Abdul Jalil, over to you. Okay, that was perhaps a overly optimistic assessment on my part. I will keep going for the time being and see if his issues recover. Apologies to all. Now that we've heard a bit more about the different universities, we want to turn to the issue of capacity building. We often hear about the quote unquote northern universities building the capacity of the so-called southern universities. But from what we've heard so far, it doesn't sound like this was entirely the case. So I'm wondering if each of you could please tell us about your capacity building experience. Who needed what support and who built whose capacity? I want to start with Musa Ismail this time.
Thank you, Liz. I'm Musa Ismail again from University of Zalingei. I'm glad to talk about capacity building. One of the goals of our cooperation with Tufts University was capacity building. And through this experience, I can say that this goal has already been achieved. From our side as researcher at the University of Zalingei, we learn from international experts like Helen Young and her colleagues from Tufts University. We learn from them how to write a good proposal for scientific research. Also, we learn how to design appropriate research questions, how to write a good research protocol, how to select suitable tools to be used for data collection and information, how to analyze data and information, how to write research report, how to do do you apply the ethics of scientific research while collecting information. All these things we learn from them, and here I would like to thank them too much. As for Tufts University, I think it has benefit from the fact that can conduct scientific research in Sudan or in any state in Sudan in cooperation with the local universities here in Sudan without the participation of researchers from Tufts, especially in the stage of data collection or fieldwork. Because of this, they may pass the difficulties of complicated procedures for the entry of foreigners in Sudan, as you know, or the situation in Sudan is changing continuously. Sometimes foreigners are forbidden to enter the Sudan for different reasons, and sometimes also they may restrict it to go to the states or to the fields. So these restrictions, their movement may not let them to come to Sudan, or if they come to Khartoum, capital of Sudan, they may not come to the states. Also, one of the benefits that we obtain from through this cooperation is the publication of results of our study on the Tufts University website, and we are happy for that. And thus we had the opportunity to be known or seen by other researchers worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Musa. Let's turn to Helen.
Thank you, Liz. So I think we learned three things about capacity building. First of all, capacity building has not been a one-way process. Both sides, or all sides, have benefited greatly as part of this multi-directional learning process. So we have complementary skills and capacities. For example, the Sudan universities, in addition to their technical disciplines, have a deep contextual and historical knowledge. They also have an established presence at state level and long-term relationships with a wide range of local and national stakeholders. This means they understand both the formal and customary institutions. They know the entry points and the challenges in reaching them. Also, I should say that the openness and trust some local stakeholders extended to us during our visits was, in my view, down to the work of the universities and the relationships they had, for example, with the Legislative Council in Zalingei, who briefed us extensively during one of my visits. And from Tufts University side, we hopefully bring a wider international perspective on the issues and an awareness of the most recent developments, debates, discourses. We also have access to global databases and libraries at our disposal, unlike our Darfuri partners who were cut off from international sources during the years of sanctions. We also brought practical considerations of project management, administration, managing budgets from an international perspective, working in partnership with international organizations, etc. So my second point is that the capacity building was not limited just to the partners and around the research projects. Many of the benefits were extended to other local and international partners. For example, I believe that all universities experienced wider benefits as the learning was shared within the universities. And also the tattooed international partners, we've heard about NCA and CRS today, who worked in these states. The final point was the importance of flexible and adaptive approaches to capacity building and also to management. On both sides, we experienced challenges. For example, with the constraints of the international banking system and the challenges of communications with unpredictable power and networks. And in this case, we are particularly grateful to CRS and the way in which they facilitated some of these processes, which allowed funds to flow to the university. I should also acknowledge the willingness of Tufts University to enter into these new arrangements. Thus, flexibility and adaptation is required on all sides if this type of partnership is going to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Finally, over to you, Abu Bakr.
Thank you, Liz. The capacity building activities had gone in multi-direction, as my colleague Helen mentioned. University of Al Fashir has organized 4 capacity building workshops, 3 of them for capacity building and 1 for finding dissemination. In the first capacity building, expert from University of Al Fashir and UNDP trained about 20 participants from state institutions, from Ministry of Agriculture, Administrative of Animal Resources, Water Resources, Forestry and Agricultural Station, and others, and also staff from a non-governmental organization that working in the area of livelihood and natural resources. The topic of training were field data collection, data analysis, report writing, and research ethics. The second capacity building was on the topic of project management, conflict analysis in natural resource management, research protocol, community participation in research. Also, provincial academicians from Al Fashir University and Zalingei University trained 33 participants from institutions or state institutions. The third capacity building was specific for research team members. Research team leader has completed Tufts University online CT course on social and behavior research. CT is abbreviation of collaborative institutional training initiative. Then he trained the rest of members on research asset and field data collection tools. As requirements set by this university, we had to attend the training and pass the exam. I would like to mention here also a very important part that we got experience. I personally got experience in how to manage and monitor the partnership project from alert device of the partnership. Our colleague from Tufts University and who kept reminding us the timeline, appointment and deliverable report. I appreciate her so much. She was and is still icon of the partnership. Also, we got new skills and experience from the comment and advice made by some members of Ta'adud Research Advisory Group, especially during proposal of study proposal settings, and also during the presentation of findings in during the dissemination event. Our sincere grateful to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abu Bakr. So those were some thoughts on capacity building and the different experiences that the partners had with capacity building. Now I want to turn to hearing from each of you about what was successful in this partnership. What did your university achieve that you are most proud of as a result of this partnership? Or what do you think will have the longest, most lasting effect upon you or your partners or the work? Let's start with Helen.
Thank you, Liz. I have 2 points I want to stress. First of all, for me, this project marked a shift in our approach to participation. Over the course of the past 2 decades working in Sudan, I've seen a shift in approach regarding participating in research. If we think of participation along a continuum, with one end signifying co-opting people to collaborate, and the other end representing more equitable and inclusive participation that is associated with empowerment, I think our partnership represents a clear intent to move towards participation as the basis for empowerment and away from participation as simply co-opting others into our own projects. We still have a long way to go in localizing research, and this will, I think, will only occur when we have international research grants for our partners, when they can secure their own research grants to follow their own research agendas. So my second point comes back to the continuity and support for research and learning among local stakeholders. We know that Sudan has a long history of scholarship and academic achievement, and consequently there is a space and an appetite for research. But with this partnership, particularly the way in which it responded to local stakeholder interests and engaged them from the start, I think this strengthened local support and interest in research processes and the results. So this process of fostering an interest in evidence and evidence-based approaches, it was also promoted through the Research and Advisory Group and their wider networks. And as a result, I can see that the partnerships and the relationships through the Research Advisory Group have generated a very positive attitude towards research and learning, and of course, problem solving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Now to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, can you share with us some of the successes from your perspective?
Yeah, to me, the perception and interaction of local people, interviews and respondents from study communities were noticeable during finding dissemination workshop. They were very happy because their voice and interests were heard and documented in research profile of Fashir University. Particularly in this dissemination workshop, many relevant decision makers, including the governor of the North Darfur and vice chancellor and director of many administrations, were there, and they promised to respond the finding positively. The second thing is exchange of experience and knowledge between University of Al Fashir staff and the Zalingei staff and international researchers. The third thing is really we learned new methodologies in data collection using qualitative method, qualitative analysis from American universities, because the quantitative method and the classical qualitative method focus on the statistical majority analysis, but in this case, it focus on all the views and opinions of the interviews in result analysis. Also, our staff or University of Al Fashir staff introduced indigenous knowledge to the socio-ecological system of Darfur to global wider readership. As other things, this partnership seems to be the science diplomacy, which is capable to create the mutual benefit between Sudanese and American institutions during a time of economic and political sanctions. So we can say the academy and researchers succeeded where politics failed. Also, another achievement, it's related to the findings of the study. It is change brought about via a community-based natural resource management committees, especially involvement of women in executive bodies of committees was great help to the community in by increasing the awareness of natural environment resources and decreasing the gender-based discrimination. In this term, women established a forest in a Shagra community. The area of forest was bare and sandy, where the dry period lasts every year lasts from 8 to 9 months. So establishment of forests was not easy. The women were transported water from some 3 kilometer distance every dry areas by hand or using donkeys to irrigate the seedlings until the forest was established. This was initiative of Forest Development, Women Development Association supported by WFP and Practical Action UK. Anyway, this story was interesting and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abu Bakr. Now to Musa Adam Ishmael. Musa Ismail, could you share some successes from your experiences with the partnership?
Thank you, Liz. I'm Musa Ismail from University of Zalingei. About the successful story and university achieved through the partnership with Tufts University. I'm not mostly proud of. I'd like to say here that at the beginning of our cooperation with Tufts University to implement the study about the role of native administration and conflict resolution and natural resource management, we learned that, or we know that the researchers from Tufts University, especially Helen and are not able to come to our states or to the Sudan to participate in all the stages of the study. Thus, we were fully responsible for the study. And this was a challenge for us because it's the first time, especially for me, to lead a study like this. So I consider it as test or the examination for us. But with continued communication with researchers from our colleague from Tufts University and Helen, I could say that we succeed in implementing all the stages of the study according to what was planned. Through this study, a number of our university staff was trained in the area of data collection and analysis and selecting of suitable tools to be used in data collection and writing scientific papers. So here too, I must mention that the final support, financial support we received from Tufts University to implement the study was appreciated and motivated because we are in Sudanese universities. We lack this financial support, even from our government, which caused us to discontinue or to search work, even they are qualified to search, but the financial report is one of their problems. Also, this type of cooperation has achieved one of our university's goals, which is cooperation with other universities, especially outside Sudan, in order to exchange experiences through joint studies like this study. Also, through this cooperation between the two universities, Tufts and University of Zalingei, Tufts University has granted me a fellowship certificate in the year 2020 and in the year 2021. And this is great honor for me. So thank you to Tufts University as personal. Thank you. Back to you, please.
Thank you very much, Musa. Could we just make sure that everyone is muted? Thank you. So as a reminder to the participants, if you have any questions that come up at any point over the course of this webinar, please post them in the Q&A, not the chat, and we will answer as many as we can in a little bit. Now for my final question on this panel. What was your biggest challenge based on this inter-university partnership? How did you solve this challenge, and what would you do differently if you were to do it again? Let's turn to Abu Bakr first.
I think the establishment of collaboration was a big challenge because when we started to talk about the collaboration, the political relations between Sudan and US government were strained. US government was imposing economic and political sanctions, I mentioned before, against previous regime of Al Fashir. So we have been engaged in talking and reviewing the ways of plan of work almost for 1 year. before the official sign. So the willings of both sides and the good background of Professor Helen Young with Sudanese affairs and political implications and complications help a lot to accomplish the establishment or establish the collaboration between two universities. And also the commitment of CRS, Catholic Relief Service, to facilitate the correspondence of or transfer the funding to the Al Fashir University was great additive and help to the accomplishment of this partnership. Also, there is a great challenge regard to the access to nomadic group during the field data collection. By the time that data collection started, nomad pastoralists move away from some village, especially in Dar es Salaam localities and Al Fashir localities, due to eruption of dispute between some nomad pastoralists and sedentary farmers. So the holding as a focal group discussion was not possible. The problem was solved by a field data collection facilitators from DARA and a voluntary network for rural and health development organization. Those are local national organization partners of the Hadr project beside Oxfam America. They contacted key informants of nomadic group and arranged the interview meeting in their office in Al Fashir. Also, the emergence of COVID-19 disturbed the plan, was delayed the plan timeline of plan by several months. And restarting the study entailed resizing the number of target sites and target communities, and the number of people in focal group discussion, and also to abide to measures set by health authorities to avoid the infection by pandemic disease. People after COVID in some places were hesitant to attend the mass gathering, and in contrast, some did not follow the measures set by the health authorities. They insisted to attend the interview even in numbers bigger than allowed. The total number across focal group discussion in each community should range between 5 to 10 according to our plan after COVID emergencies. But in such a case, when people insist to attend, our research or field researchers manage to change the place if the meeting place is so small or narrow. They change the place in wider space, enable the respondents and the researchers to sit away from each other as prescribed by health authorities. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Abu Bakr. We'll turn to Musa next.
Thank you, Liz. I'm Musa Ismail from University of Zalingei. About the challenges that face us during our study and how we solve them. I say that one of the biggest challenges facing us is the deterioration of security situation in Darfur, especially in our state, where it's sometimes difficult for us to move to some places or to some areas in order to collect data and information at a timely manner or as planned. So in this case, we may need to need support from people from the local community, or we may change the plant or the samples to select as a secure area, and this may lead to the delaying of the activities sometimes. because you need to prepare or to plan again and again when you face a security situation sometime. In this case, we may need to train also some local people to participate in our study. And this may increase the cost of the study because you will not expect to use the person. And also sometimes delaying the implementation time of some stages. Also, one of the challenges that we asked last time is instability of value of Sudanese pound, Sudanese SDG or pound, or against the foreign currencies, especially the dollar. And this may lead to failure to keep the pace with the budget, because when you prepare the budget of the study, maybe after months, the exchange rate may be changed, and this means that the budget that you plan may not cover the cost of the activities when you like to start or you want to start activity. And this may need to constantly update this budget. Among the challenges also that face us are also the rugged or bad local roads, especially in the rainy season. Here in the rainy season, it's very difficult to reach some areas because there's no good roads and very many valleys or wadis that may be difficult to be crossed by the vehicles, as well as you may need to especially when you need to meet the nomads or pastoralist communities who are on the move continuously, and also they are usually settled or found in remote areas that difficult to reach them. As I said, especially in the rainy season when they are moving from south to north. Also, one of the challenges that we face is COVID-19, and as my colleague Abu Bakr from Al Fashir University said, this delay our some activities several months, but finally we find a way to conduct the field work and consider all the precautions of COVID-19. Thank you. Back to Liz.
Thank you so much, Musa. And lastly to you, Helen.
Thank you, Liz. I think most of my points are actually echoing the ones that have come earlier from Musa and Abu Bakr. Obviously, the ongoing contextual challenges that make it difficult for all of us to go about our business. And so the conflict and insecurity, but also the uncertainties, the more recent uncertainties associated following the coup. So for example, even in convening meetings, we have to be flexible and regularly adapt to the changing situation. The pandemic has been an obvious challenge for all of us, affecting all aspects of our work. And from Tufts' perspective, all research was actually stopped, and we had to halt studies midway and call people back from the field. However, in Sudan, Tufts have had a long experience of teams working remotely, with team members and partners working in different locations and depending on technology and power that did not work. So in a way, when the lockdowns came in the US and in the UK and also for Sudan, we were prepared because the partnerships were already in place. We had experienced colleagues in country, and as we've heard, the universities were able to continue and adapt their work, and were particularly flexible in adapting to the new context of conducting research in a safe manner, in a safe manner for communities and researchers with regard to COVID. So what would we do differently? I think this point is very much from Tufts. Over the course of our research, While the researchers have engaged with communities through our research activities, my sense is that we need to give more consideration to those relationships, and in particularly thinking about how we feed back. We know there is a strong interest in the research at the community level, and the researchers maintain links with community members long after the field visits. And we do provide some information in requests for updates and other information. But my sense is we need to give more consideration to how we share our findings locally and the ways in which we gather the feedback and input from communities on the work that's been done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen, and to all of you for sharing some of the prepared remarks about this discussion. I'd like to just briefly reflect a bit on what we heard here, and also as I'm playing the role of Musa Jalil to think a bit about what he had said and prepared. So first, we see in this webinar the discussion about collaborative research and partnerships between Northern and Southern universities. And this type of partnership has been a big topic of discussion in recent years, both between universities as well as between international and local NGOs, UN agencies, and national organizations, etc. So the North-South partnership is a recurring theme that members of the international community are dealing with. One of the things that frequently comes up in that discussion is the power dynamic and the extent to which the Northern entities impose an agenda, in this case, a research agenda, and a way of working, which makes these partnerships less equal, less collaborative. I think that what we see here, however, in this discussion today is an example of some of the ways in which this sort of partnership can truly be more collaborative, and some of the benefits and learning that can come from a more collaborative approach. For instance, I was struck by when the different discussants were talking about some of the challenges they faced, how the challenges were well navigated and often mitigated by the very existence of this multinational North-South partnership. And I think this is an example of how these partnership entities can really bring to bear a positive outcome, not just for the research, but for all of the involved parties. Related to that is the question of capacity building, which we addressed, and whose capacity is being built and to what end. And I think that the discussion here today really reflects, as Helen said, that capacity is a two-way street. And while there's some components that the international partner, in this case Tufts, or the Northern University, may be able to specifically help build the capacity of the Sudan-based universities, there's also a huge amount of capacity building that is done in the other direction, having to do with the invaluable local knowledge, local understanding, local context, and the expertise of people such as our Sudanese panelists that will never be replicated by those of us from the North who haven't lived in these countries and contexts our whole lives and been so deeply embedded within these important national university structures. Lastly, I think it's important to point out that in the partnership we were discussing here, there's also the role of the NGO, and this is a point that Musa wanted to stress. The NGOs play a critical dynamic in the research process. So when we think about the nature of these partnerships and what works and what doesn't work as well and why, we need to think about the great value being added by these NGOs. Now, adding another layer of partners, of course, also can increase some of the complexities and challenges But in our view, in the end result, the benefits outweigh those challenges. Okay, so we want to turn now to the next part of our program, which is about hearing about some of the research findings that came out of this partnership. As you can tell, a great deal of research has taken place, so there's no way we have time to cover all of the findings, but you can read much more about our work in this partnership on the Feinstein International Center website, and the link will go into the chat now. I'm now very pleased to turn the presentation over to Hassan, who is the only person from the Tufts side who participated in depth in every single one of the studies that we have undertaken through both Tadood and Rising. Hassan is going to discuss just a few of the overarching findings that he thinks are most critical. Thank you so much, Hassan. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Liz. It's a great pleasure and honor to participate in this webinar and to present some of Tufts' learning from research in Sudan, which actually covers a lot of areas around livelihoods, natural resources, and informal communal social safety nets. Next, please. The main purpose of this part of our webinar is to discuss some of the prevailing narratives about natural resources and conflicts in Darfur, the limitations of these narratives, and what our research and learning at Tufts tell us about them. I will focus on literature around natural resources, the perceived and actual involvement of natural resources in conflicts between different livelihood specializations, particularly farming and pastoralism, and also indeed exploring the way natural resources may drive conflicts or promote peace, because that's important for context analysis and for ensuring that interventions respond properly to the challenge communities face in Sudan. However, it is also important from conflict sensitivity perspective, that is ensuring that development programs contribute to social cohesion and avoid causing conflicts. Next, please. My starting point will be with the way in which natural resources are perceived to be driving conflicts. Overall, there seems to be a general consensus on increasing scarcity of natural resources, and that scarcity leads to more competition and conflict between different users of natural resources. Two major points relate to this consensus, particularly in Darfur. First, rainfall averages are declining, and second, desert is moving southward, and climate change is perceived to be exacerbating these scarcities resulting from the two factors. So now let's look at the evidence used to support this narrative in Darfur. Next, please. In terms of rainfall, the prevailing argument is that there is a trend of decreasing rainfall average in Darfur, which many authors claiming an increased frequencies of drought years. In 2011, Zhang and others analyzed rainfall for 57 years between 1948 and 2005. Using global precipitation database or data sets, they claimed a significant reduction in average rainfall during the rainy season, particularly in the central belt of Sudan, including Darfur. Also, the Climate Hazard Group analyzed rainfall data for 49 years, from 1960 to 2009. They also claimed a significant decrease in average rainfall by almost 100 millimeters across Sudan, Ethiopia, and Kenya. Next, please. In terms of desertification, different approaches were adopted to analyze the impact of climate trends in vegetation cover. A common narrative is that the Sahara is moving southward as a result of desertification. This is based on early work in Sudan that dates back to the 30s. For example, in 1935, Stebbing claimed that the desert moved 300 kilometers over 300 years as a result of human activities. His conclusion was based on observation and consultation with colonial administration. In 1988, a team of researchers led by Lamprey claimed that the boundaries between the desert and sub-desert in Kordofan, which is the western region of Sudan, moved southward by 100 kilometers during the 17 years from 1958 to 1975. They indicated that this was a result of thousands of years of abusing ecosystems. Actually, they claimed that this was a result of thousands of years of abusing the ecosystem. What I would like to say here is that there is no general consensus on the long-term climatic trends facing the Sahel or Darfur, including whether average rainfall is decreasing or whether the forests are being taken by deserts. Let me now show you a different picture to what is really happening. Next, please. The implications of these perceived scarcities in terms of decreased crop and fodder production, as well as availability of water, are often used as the entry point for explaining intercommunal conflicts involving different natural resources users. In fact, the eruption of Darfur conflict in 2003 was accompanied by a hot debate about the role of climate change and other environmental factors in fueling conflicts in Darfur and elsewhere in the country. Working with that understanding, current analysis and future prospects draw a dire picture shaped by competition and violent conflicts as a result of desertification and decreased rainfalls. In a recent report published by UNEP and the Higher Council for Environment and Natural Resources, they predicted a southward shift in the agroclimatic zone, rendering the northern parts of Sudan limitedly suitable for cultivation. They add that climate change results in high rates of desertification in the region dominated by sandy soils, putting stress on mobile pastoralists' livelihoods and increase the risk of conflict. Next, please. Indeed, studies that analyzed rainfall with a long-term perspective show a different story. As I have shown you, Zhang worked with 57 years, and the climate hazard group worked with 49 years. A study that analyzed rain gauges data from across Sudan over a period of 100 years found that there is no evidence to support the narrative of overall trend of decreasing rainfall average. According to their analysis, these changes, when happen, they reflect interseasonal variability in different locations, as well as variability between years. The study concluded that over the last 100 years, there was a variation between years and decades, rather than a consistent trend of decreasing rainfall. This is also supported by analysis of Holm and others who relied on data that date back to 1900, allowing their study to capture a much longer period of time when compared to studies whose reference point was 1960s, a period known for its exceptional rainfall. Their conclusion was that despite the dry period that prevailed since 70s, rainfall average in the Sahel were stable. Addressing the question of the role of decreased rainfall on conflicts, Kivani and Gray in 2008 showed that there is no correlation between structural breaks in rainfall average and occurrence of conflicts across Sudan or in Darfur. The only area that experienced a structural break in terms of average rainfall in Darfur was North Darfur. But that happened 30 years before the conflict, and no significant change in precipitation was detected since then. They add that the structural break in average rainfall that took place 30 years before the conflict in Darfur happened in other countries in the African Sahel, where there is no record of conflict with the same scale of Darfur's. Next, please. So now, commenting on Lamprey, Helen indicated that the desert original boundary that Lamprey used was wrong because he assigned it to the 75 millimeter contour line, which itself is not static and changes between years according to rainfall variability. Recent studies show a recovery of vegetation cover, particularly in Darfur, and depict the Sahel region as being resilient to drought, with no significant change in vegetation production per unit of rainfall. However, with a long-term perspective, it is safe to say that the recovery of vegetation cover indicates a return to average rainfall that prevailed during the 50s and 60s after a long period of extreme droughts that dominated the 70s and 80s. What we learn from these studies is that when the argument for overall desertification and rainfall average decrease is evaluated against a long-term perspective, it is largely debunked. Next, please. Focusing on climate change and climate trends overall as a major driver of conflict led to interventions that focus solely on technical aspects of adaptation and leave the political and economic grievances without any positive consideration. It also obscures the institutional and policy issues shaping natural resources governance and how they are involved in conflicts. Moreover, this narrative reflects a poor understanding to traditional livelihoods and how they actually work in Sudan. Often, they are presented as either responsible for desertification or competing over dwindling natural resources. Talking about the abused ecosystem, Ibrahim, for example, blamed desertification on rain-fed cultivation and sedentary animal breeding, but not on mobile pastoralism. Many agencies currently and scholars also adopt a narrative of pastoralists being pushed by drought to graze their animals on farmers' crops before harvest. In addition, the apolitical nature of this narrative fails to engage with the social disparities between groups and within them effectively, and that results in perceiving some livelihood specializations as less vulnerable than others to environmental shocks. In fact, for years, the vulnerabilities of pastoralists in Darfur have been neglected, and they are still excluded by many development initiatives, particularly in Darfur for various reasons, including assumptions that they are difficult to find or that they are better off than sedentary farming communities. While it is true that pastoralist communities are better off in terms of livelihoods, assets, and ownership, the poorer segments of both farming and pastoralist communities are quite similar in terms of their vulnerabilities. This indicates a significantly high inequality between poor and better off pastoralist households, particularly those headed by women. Nonetheless, nomadic pastoralists suffer from poor access to education, lower literacy levels, and outstandingly high levels of maternal death. Next, please. Indeed, traditional livelihoods of farming and pastoralism are both adapted to extreme variabilities that shape Sudan climate. This adaptation is a result of their ability to work with the variability rather than against it. Our research findings under Ta'adud 1 supports that and show that traditional livelihood realize their resilience through various strategies like cultivating multiple fields in different locations in the same season. And this is a resilience strategy against localized interseasonal variability. Farmers also tackle interseasonal variability through multiple sowing of seeds in the same season. Storing grains from good harvests to cover the needs of multiple years is also a resilience strategy against annual variability. Livestock mobility, which is practiced with a varying degree by pastoralists, whether they are specialized farmers or specialized herders, is a production strategy to withstand variability in its different forms through benefiting from further resources in different seasons. In recent years, mobile pastoralists are also increasingly practicing farming as a strategy to produce their own food. Next, please. So this is what we call the socio-ecological resilience, which is a management approach in the context of dry lands, allowing pastoralists and farmers to live with uncertainty and unpredictability. In the words of Schoons, cyclical patterns of rainfall availability allowed periods of drought to be offset by periods of plenty, when herds and flocks grow again and stores of grain were established. Next, please. So this photo, or these four photos, I'm just trying to show you what socio-ecologically means, socio-ecological resilience means in reality. So I took those photos from the same area in North Darfur, but in different seasons. The right one showing grain-fed farming during the rainy season, and the left one was taken in the beginning of the Talib, when pastoralists starts feeding their herds by grazing them on harvested fields. So next, please. Now, since we have begun to talk about resilience of traditional livelihoods to environmental variability, it is very important to stress that the resilience of this livelihood is not merely achieved through production strategies. Indeed, an integral part of that resilience is the integration of different livelihood specializations. That integration is a result of inclusive customary governance institutions that for years facilitated synergy, cooperation, and complementarity between these livelihoods. These institutions facilitate inclusive access to land in different seasons, allowing farmers and pastoralists to share inputs. The clearest example of this institution is the institution of the Talib, which is a date agreed by tribal administrations on which harvests should be completed and pastoralists are allowed to graze their livestock on crop residues of rain-fed harvested fields. The sharing of inputs take place after that date as livestock utilize crop residues and farmlands are fertilized by organic manure. So within the natural space, farming and pastoralism are practiced in different seasons, with farming practiced during the rainy season and pastoralism practiced in the dry season. Next, please. These institutions have been challenged severely by many economic and political factors, including the demise of the role of local tribal administration, the ambiguity created by the rise of statutory institutions along with customary institutions organizing access to land, transformation of livelihoods practices, as well as the commercialization of natural resources. These changes jeopardize the complementarity of livelihood specializations through undermining the way they relate to each other and the way they relate to the environment. Particularly, there has been a shift from inclusive multiple rights systems where both specializations could be practiced in the same natural resources space to satisfy their needs equitably towards exclusive individual rights that recognize only the rights of individual owners. This implied a shift in how access to land is granted, from being organized by community leadership towards being obtained via inheritance, sale, or rent, and at times, violence. Next, please. Rangeland fencing, the demise of colleague institutions, and the expansion of agriculture on migratory routes, and the commercialization of crop residues are amongst the implications of that shift on socio-ecological system, within which different livelihood specializations evolved. It set farming and pastoralism as competing livelihoods rather than complementary ones. Next, please. So here, a relational perspective to natural resources is needed. And that dictates that we do not look at natural resources as commodities, but rather as a space where people's livelihoods can thrive. The more the natural resources are treated as objects or stocks that should be managed through exclusive rights, the more farming and pastoralism are partitioned, and that leads to economic inefficiency, and it also erodes the potential for peaceful coexistence through protecting the rights of different natural resources users. When we look at natural resources from a relational perspective, scarcities appear to be more societal, that there is no material scarcity as such, but rather an inequitable access for different users. The demise of integration is one of the factors that contribute to degradation because it limits the sharing of nutrients between the different components of the socio-ecological system. Next, please. Based on findings from our research, social cohesion and restoring relationships are key incentives for participation in integrated natural resource management projects. From communities' perspective, integrated natural resources management can allow people to organize access to natural resources in a way that respects the rights of different users. In Darfur, local communities with different livelihood specializations and different identity background would like to see an end to conflicts in all its forms. The interconnected web of conflicts had a severely damaging impact on livelihoods. After 2 decades of hostility, communities that experience stability and return to their original settlements are making a lot of efforts to restore their relationships. One of the ways through which relationships are restored is reinstating informal social safety nets, which are traditional support systems managed by community or a group of communities with the aim of supporting individuals or households in need for support through socially accepted procedures and expectations. Examples of informal social safety nets that people are reinstating to restore relationships include working in Nafirs to build houses destroyed by fires. And Nafir is a kind of local collective actions involving community members or members of more than one community. They also, one of the examples also contributing to financially to condolences and contributing also financially to weddings. And these were violated during the conflict, as in different parts of the region, relationships were often shared by enmity. However, communities where there remain unresolved tensions are still experiencing a breakdown of the informal social safety net systems through violation of social norms or through eroding the integrity of the whole system. While reinstating intercommunal informal social safety nets support restoring relationships, it is also a mechanism for risk sharing and for maximizing the benefits that people in need for support receive through increasing the number of contributors. Next, please. Finally, moving towards a peaceful sharing of natural resources would require development actors to engage with social and political complexities involved in conflict. Technical interventions that focus on improved water services, reforestation, and technology transfer in general would not have a lasting impact if the issues of institutions are not addressed. This requires first recognizing the interconnected multi-level conflicts and to properly analyzing conflict causes at different levels. Bringing more signatories from armed movements into national peace agreements cannot lead to conflict resolution at the local level. During the 2 years of Sudan transitional period after 30 years of the National Congress Party rule, Sudan witnessed a dramatic increase in intercommunal conflict despite the good rainy seasons of those 2 years. Restoring relationships and consensus building around natural resources and institutions would be the right entry point for local conflicts. This would not resolve conflicts over natural resources, but will allow farming and pastoralism to share a sustainable future. It will also lead to stability that can open the door for reinstating the various systems of cooperation and support, such as informal social safety nets that prevailed for decades. So for those of you who are interested, these findings are covered in depth in our desk study, 4 briefs published under the Ta'adud project, as well as the Rising study on social safety nets that will be published soon. So thank you so much, Liz, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Hassan. That was fascinating, and we really appreciate your contribution across all of these studies. We're now going to turn to the Q&A portion of our program today. And as a reminder, many of you have been putting your questions in the Q&A icon. That's terrific. We are reviewing them and we will try to get to as many as we can. There's quite a few questions for Hassan based on his great presentation, but I thought I should give him a short break from speaking and instead turn back to our university representatives to talk a little bit more about the partnership, and then we'll come back with some more specific questions for Hassan. So again, please take this opportunity to type questions into the Q&A icon there. So we have a couple questions that have to do with the sort of longer term capacity and sustainability of what the university partnership has created here. And the gist of these questions is that we seem to be, we the presenters seem to be saying that this partnership works really well and there's joint capacity building, but should the funding or the project end, what components are in place to allow ongoing work in this regard by the local universities to keep moving these research agendas and the program recommendations forward. So a question about sustainability. I'm going to start with that question for Helen, and then Helen can turn it over to Musa or Abu Bakr as you like.
Thank you, Liz. Sorry, could you just say that question again?
Sure. The question, it's a combined, there were a number of questions that have to do with this point, but it's about what is the longevity of the model that we're building here beyond the time at which this actual project ends, this partnership ends. Do we think that the research will go forward with the Sudanese universities? What is the capacity and sustainability of this?
Great, thank you so much. Gosh, that's a very big question. I want to start off by saying that, well, first of all, to acknowledge the very limited funding situation facing the universities. And I think we heard from our colleagues that funding isn't available to them. So this was a unique opportunity. But I should also say at Tufts that our funding is not assured, and it's quite unusual to have the continuity of work and projects that we have had in Sudan. And I think this is based on our track record and also the processes of stakeholder outreach, engagement, and uptake. In other words, we don't do this in a bubble in our ivory tower. We try to do it alongside in collaboration with a range of partners. And I think that the continuity is also, when I say the track record, it's in part evidence of speaking to the interests of the stakeholders so that the research has a relevance to policies, programs, and local actors. In fact, we have been requested by various local actors to repeat studies in their areas because they thought they were important. So I think that speaking to local interests and filling evidence gaps is important. The other thing about the looking ahead to the future, sustainability is not assured. The capacities that have been built mutually are still there, and I think we all value them on all sides, but we need to continue to foster, to seek funding sources, looking for opportunities to further this collaboration in future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Helen. The next question is a two-part question having to do with some of the geopolitical dynamics at play at present. And I think this question is best answered by Musa and Abu Bakr. The first part of the question has to do with the unstable political situation that has taken place in Sudan and the current government's orientation towards Russia. Based on this, do we expect the US government to prevent its universities from cooperating with Sudanese universities moving forward? Musa, I'll let you answer that first part of the question, and then I'll do the second. Go ahead, Musa.
Okay, thank you. I'm Musa from University of Zalingei. So my question is about the unstable political situation in Sudan, and as the current government orientation towards Russia. Do you expect the USA government to prevent these universities from cooperating with Sudanese university? So this is our question. Yeah.
Yep, that's the question.
Yeah, thank you. This is our question. Back to you, please.
Do you have thoughts on whether or not you expect the US to prevent this work from going forward, Musa?
Yeah, I expect that, but unfortunately.
You do expect that? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, that's too bad. Okay, the second part of the question, I think I'll turn to Abu Bakr for, which has to do with the Sudanese context. And do you expect any repercussions from Sudanese authorities to prevent cooperation between Sudanese institutions and American institutions?
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for this question. Regarding this question, I suggest the extension and continuation of inter-university partnership, and also to expand to include other African and American universities, from countries of similar context in terms of natural resources, livelihood, and peace and conflict-related issues. Countries like Chad, South Sudan, Kenya, and Uganda. This framework can reflect the broader collaboration between global North and South universities. And also, I expect to include this, I suggest to include these activities like other activities like exchange of academic staff and exchange of students, and involve scholarship program like for PhD and master studies. So this partnership as Tahadud Consortium would include actors, non-academic actors like national and international non-governmental organizations and traditional communities, governmental institutions in a given countries and cities. So the term of, or the aspect of funding should be discussed in this framework between the academic institution and development practitioners and institutions. Because such a type of collaboration could serve the natural resource management and livelihood and peace in a wider range of Africa. At the same time, it supplement the American universities with inform socio-ecological system context, and it also strengthens the relationship between the nation of respective countries. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Abu Bakr, for that. The next question I'm going to offer to Helen. Helen, one of our participants says that they have never managed to persuade donors to fund capacity development for research in the context of international development research. How did you do it?
In short, as I described earlier, it took us more than 10 years. We started off with the usual model of working, where as an international university, we might be recruited by an international NGO or the UN to do a piece of work. And then we might work with some of our local partners. But we were very fortunate in 2004 to have a grant where we could lead our own independent studies, working alongside Sudanese researchers. And from this experience, we learn of the importance of that, of the collaboration. And so, for example, in our partnership, we had many years of experience working directly with Professor Musa Ismail from University of Zalingei, whereas our partnership with University of Al Fashir through Dr. Abu Bakr Zayam was new. So somebody also asked, I think, do you have to have these established relationships or can you start without them? And my answer to that would be, it helps, but you don't necessarily have to have them. If you are committed to developing a partnership, I think there is a great strength in working together. And I should also say we have had several unsuccessful joint proposals seeking funding for research partnerships. So it hasn't been a story entirely of success. I think there is a need for a shift among the donors and the research funders to look more favorably at inter-university partnerships led by local partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. I now have a question for Hassan, specifically about the research that you presented on. Hassan, you said that despite the 2 good successive rainy seasons, intercommunal conflicts increased. Could you explain this a little bit further?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. So when the transitional government was appointed after the agreement between a coalition of political parties and transitional military council, there was a lot of hope and optimism with regards to the future of Sudan in transitioning towards a more economically prosperous and peaceful country. And we have seen a lot of negotiations on the table between government actors as well as rebel groups or different armed groups. And that culminated into the signing of the Juba Peace Agreement. But unfortunately, despite that peace between government and different armed groups, we have seen intensified intercommunal conflicts in different parts of Sudan, not only in Darfur, including Eastern Sudan, Kordofan, and the Blue Nile. So that relates to my point about identifying the issues at different levels. So local level conflicts, while they are interconnected with national level conflicts, they also require specific considerations to the issues that cause conflict or the factors that involved in conflict at the local level. And part of that is what we have been talking about, is how we organize access to natural resources. How could that be inclusive? How can we avoid undermining the rights of different users? Because these are the entry points for a peaceful coexistence and for re-establishing or restoring relationships between different communities at the local level. We need to understand that even conflicts at the local level, not every local conflict is between farmers and herders. There is a lot of reference to local conflicts as being farmer-herder conflict, but this is far from being correct, because often even communities with the same specialization in terms of livelihood, sometimes they go into conflict with each other. And that brings to the discussion other issues that involved in conflict, including the lack of rule of law, the prevalence of small arms, and so many other factors. So I wanted to stress that if we bring more people to more armed groups to negotiate with the government and settle national level conflicts, that does not mean we automatically resolve local level conflicts. We need to really address the grassroots issues involved in these conflicts. Yeah, back to you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Hassan. We're almost done with our time for Q&A, but I want to turn to Abu Bakr to reflect on a question. Based on your experience in this inter-university partnership, what would be your suggestion for future ones of this nature? What would you suggest if someone came to you and they said they were trying to create a similar interagency partnership? Abu Bakr, do you have suggestions for future interagency partnerships?
According to our experience and lesson learned from the partnership for the last 2 years, I think my suggestion is I encourage the continuation of this partnership or re-establish another partnership, inter-university partnership. And this partnership will be expanded, maybe including universities, other Sudanese universities and American universities and African universities. My view is that the issues of natural resource management and livelihood system and issues have a global view. So when we are addressing this type of research and find some output and solution, I think we contribute to the settlement and stability of the global peace. And here the partnership, when you increase this type of consortium, I think it reflects, as I mentioned, it reflects the broader partnership between the global North and South universities. Yes, there is a problem of what is the funding. The funding of the partnership, I think, mainly come from the Western or global North universities. Here in South universities, the budget of natural resources is limited or lacking. That's something very frequent. But I mentioned the output is useful for all because the national researchers here in Sudan or in Africa, they have their indigenous knowledge that's supported by scientific research can support the Western and American universities in general with very informed socio-ecological system context. And also for long term, it's established a very good relationship between the nation of these respective countries. So we would try to see the way of continuation of this partnership and how to improve the challenge that faced during our partnership. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Abu Bakr. We want to be conscious of people's time, and we're just about at the end. We have a number of questions that do remain in the Q&A, and we're sorry we couldn't get to everyone, but thank you so much for your terrific questions. And we'll put the live recording of this event up in the coming days, so watch your email. But I want to go now to the poll that we did at the beginning. And if you could put that up and respond to the poll again. Your answers can be the same, your answers can be different. We're just curious to see if there were shifts between the first time when we did the poll at the start of the webinar and now. So just take a minute to read those questions again and make your choices. Just giving everyone another minute or two, and then I'll be able to see the poll results. Okay, great. So the shift in the results interesting. And can everybody see these results or just me?
I believe everyone can see them.
Okay, great. So I'm not seeing a huge shift in the first one, although more people have moved towards the disagree and the strongly disagree side, indicating that expertise and capacity are a two-way street, which I at least believe. We see the largest, most people agree that scarcity of natural resources contributes to conflict in Darfur. It's the greatest number of responses. And in the third one, we've seen a big decrease in the first option, that technical interventions to increase availability. People do not feel that's the way forward, and the vast majority think that we should be building consensus among users about how to organize access to natural resources. So that's terrific. Thank you all so much. Hope that you enjoyed our little poll there. I want to give a huge thanks to everyone who took time today to participate in a webinar. I know that for some you have webinar fatigue, so it's great to see a number of people with us. And as I said, there'll be a recording, a link to a recording going out in the coming days. You can also learn more about this, this partnership and the research findings from this partnership on the link that's on this final slide, as well as staying connected with Tufts, with the Feinstein Center. And you can get our newsletter and updates of whenever a new report comes out, and follow us on Twitter as well. A big thank you to all the panelists and participants today who put a huge amount of time into their contribution, as well as more broadly into the Interagency Partnership. And then a big thank you to the many people behind the scenes making this partnership run and work. And of course, most of all, to people from the communities where we work for being willing to share their voices, perspectives, and experience with our research teams. And thank you to everyone. Good day, good evening, good morning, and we hope to see you on another Tufts webinar in the near future. Thanks very much.